Mr. Connick, I've unmuted your mic, and I'm going to start unmuting other members' mics. Can you hear me? May not be at his desk.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Gary.
Hello, Gary. I'm unmuting mics right now.
Yes, this is where I want to be. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about.
Hi, this is Brian.
Hi, this is Rick.
It's MK.
In just a minute, we'll have a roll call. Got a caller from last four digits, 3490. Who's that?
Al Henry.
Hey, Al.
Hey.
Mr. Connick, are you at your mic? We're standing by for your chair. And this phone line must be.
There you go. Hey, can you hear me now?
I can.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, I don't have a mic on my computer, it turns out. So that's why you can't hear me. So I called him.
Got it. I think all of your planning commission members are now online and unmuted.
Okay. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Let's take the roll, I guess. Michelle, do you want to do that, or should I do that?
I can do it.
All right, why don't you do it?
Mr. Light,
Present.
Mr. Frazier,
Present.
Mr. Henry,
Present.
Mr. Kohler,
Present.
Miss Ishii, present, Mr. Shulin,
Present.
and Mr. Chair.
Who was the last one?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, that's me. Right. All right. Before we get going, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating. And I want to thank Mr. Curry and Michelle and the rest of the county staff that have facilitated this meeting, because I obviously could never have done so without their help. The next item is adoption of the agenda. So before we get going, I have to tell you that this meeting is being conducted in accordance with the Continuity of Government Ordinance adopted by the Board of Supervisors pursuant to Virginia Code Section 15.2.14.13, I think is the right section. And as such, we are limited in the topics that we can discuss, which were summarized in a memorandum written by Art Goff, the county attorney, that was circulated yesterday. So, as I understand it, and I'll endeavor to summarize it, we can only discuss essential business, business that is mandated by statute, like the comprehensive plan, and any other business that would be directly related to the emergency that's been declared by the governor and by the County Board of Supervisors. So everybody should keep that in mind. The meeting's been duly noticed pursuant to those restrictions and limitations, and that's what we have to stick with. So before we go forward, does anybody have any questions about any of that?
Can you
Okay,
repeat that?
No. I could repeat it, but I'm not going to. Unless there's some specific part. Come on, you know this stuff. You already heard it a couple times. Did I summarize it correctly, Mr. Curry?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. So with that in mind, I hope everybody's got the agenda before them. And I'm going to see if I've got it before me, but no, I don't know what happened to my Zoom thing. My Zoom thing is telling me my internet connection is unstable, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to see what you're putting up on the screen or not. But if you could put that up so that everybody else can see it, that's the agenda that we've got. So the only amendments I think that somebody could make that I can think of that are not on this agenda is if the commission wants to discuss something directly related to the COVID-19 situation, such as, for example, adopting some kind of resolution or communicating in some way the views of the commission to either the Board of Supervisors or the governor, who I'm sure is in Richmond waiting to hear from us, about making some exception to the general rules and so forth so that we can get on with our important business. And I say that in all seriousness. I know, you know, we had an agenda laid out. We have a backlog of 5 or 6 different special use and special permit applications and 1 text amendment. And those applicants, some of them have been waiting for some kind of action since January or February. And their businesses may depend on some action by the Planning Commission because those things can't move forward without our recommendation. It directly affects the economy of the county because depending on the action that's taken, there are people's jobs and livelihoods at stake. So I think it's pretty important that we get on with our business at the earliest possible dates, with due regard for the safety and so forth and whatever health precautions need to be taken. But I think it's something maybe, I don't know, all I'm saying is that's something, if someone wants to make a motion that we have a discussion like that, I'll second it. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as it is right now, as circulated.
Mr. Chair, if I might interject just for a second and say that your planning commissioners aren't familiar with this Zoom process, and because you have other citizens online, if members mute themselves, they will not have the authority to unmute themselves. And it's certainly okay that they do that, but if they mute themselves and they need me to unmute them, then they're going to have to get my attention, which their only way to do that is by using the built-in system to raise their hand within the Zoom platform, and then I will see that and be able to unmute them. Okay?
All right, is there anybody who doesn't understand that? I don't know what happened to my I saw the thing and I saw who was muted and not, and then, I don't know, it all disappeared. So while I'm talking, I'm going to try and re-sign in. And apologize for that.
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
I'll second that.
So that was Mr. Kohler and Ms. Ishii?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Any further discussion? I guess hearing none, the motion's been made and seconded. Let's take a vote, and I'll just go down the list. Mr. Light? Mr. Light? What happened to him?
He's muted, and I just asked him to unmute. You might start elsewhere.
I can't. Okay. Now I can unmute. It was, as you just said, Mr. Curry, once one mutes themselves, they can't unmute themselves. So I obviously went into that territory. So I'm unmuted now.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as circulated without any amendments. And we're waiting for you to vote. Aye. All right. Mr. Henry?
Aye.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Shulin?
Aye.
Ms. Ishii?
Aye.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Yes, that's everybody, right? That leaves me. I'll vote aye. All right. Our first order of business is the adoption of an electronic meeting procedure, which has been circulated, and I assume you can see it. I can't. Just a sec. So the purpose of that, or the reason for that, is that in order to have electronic meetings of this nature related to an emergency situation or a oh, look, it's back. Great. Related to an emergency or a continuity of government situation like we're in, having an electronic meeting without a quorum physically present is permitted as an exception to the FOIA statute, Freedom of Information, but only if the public body has adopted a procedure for doing that and a policy. So what's before you and what's been circulated is basically an exact copy of the same procedure that the Board of Supervisors of Rappahannock County adopted, that was prepared by Mr. Curry and approved by Mr. Goff. And so all I did was change Board of Supervisors to Planning Commission. So unless there's any questions, can I have a motion to adopt that? And well, let me add one more thing. What I propose to do is, there's some question, at least ways in my mind, about whether or not this procedure has to be adopted. What? Whether this procedure has to be adopted at a regular meeting or not. So my proposal is we adopt it now at this electronic meeting and proceed, and then when we have our regular meeting, we'll re-adopt it. So there won't be any question. I don't think there's going to be a problem about it. But anyway, with that said, is there a motion to adopt this policy and procedure?
Move
So
to
I
adopt
would
the
only-
policy and procedure.
If I may, there's still one place where it says the board rather than the commission.
Okay, where's that?
Scroll up, Gary. Right there, very first, item 1, row 1 under D. Next page, just below that,
Oh.
1D.
What?
Chairman of the board.
And the board member.
Board member.
Actually. So item
Okay.
D1 still has
To be chairman of the commission?
and the member of the commission.
Oh, got it. So it should be the commission member, and it should be the chairman of the commission. Right?
I think so, but with,
Okay.
oh, there's another, yes, okay. I will second with that modification.
Okay, great. Any other discussion?
Yes, this is MK. Thank you, first of all, Gary and Michelle and David, for moving this forward. This is all very complicated, so much appreciation. But on this, so David, as I understand what you've just said, this is essentially adopting exactly the same language as the board adopted it, just replacing it with commission. Did I understand you to say that?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, let's vote. Mr. Light,
Aye.
Mr. Henry,
Aye.
Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
Mr. Shulin,
Aye.
Ms. Ishii,
Aye.
Mr. Kohler,
Aye.
Connick votes aye. Great.
Ayes have it.
All right, it's duly, with those changes, it's duly adopted. All right, now we come to the public comment part. So before we do that, looks like we have 15 participants and 9 or 10 of them. We don't have too many people from the public here, it doesn't look like. But anyway, oh, now I just did something terrible. I lost my, oh, great. Sorry folks, I clicked on something and my thing disappeared. Is there anybody from the public that wants to make a comment before we have Mr. Curry explain how to make a comment? Because if nobody wants to make a comment, we can just skip over that.
Mr. Chair, I do have Phil raising a hand, and if you'd like, I can coordinate this portion of the meeting for you.
Okay, that would be great.
So just before we jump into that, you'll see on the screen, hopefully, the different ways through which you can raise your hand if you're interested. Those on the phone who don't see a screen can raise their hand by dialing *9. Those on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone can select more, and then there's a choice to raise hand. And if you're on a PC or a Mac, there should just be a button to raise your hand. So I'll take them in order. The first is Phil, whose mic I am now unmuting.
Unmuted. Okay, I just want to defer until the next live meeting. Just wanted to check in.
Phil, your audio is very low. If you could get closer to your microphone.
I just wanted to check in and defer until the next live meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yours or ours? Thank you, Phil.
The next,
All right, anybody else?
yes, we have Paige's iPhone. I'm unmuting his mic.
Whose
Paige Goody
dog
from
is
Jackson
barking?
District. Mine.
Okay, I want to make sure it's not Fraser's dog.
I just want to thank you all for getting together and getting back to work. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I realize how difficult this is to do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else?
There are no other hands raised at this time.
All right, good. The public comment period is closed. So, since we're not allowed to discuss anything else but the comp plan, personally, I'm finding this even more difficult than I thought it was going to be. to try and have a discussion like this by Zoom with documents and maps. But in any event, the main thing I want to do is get everybody kind of refocused. We haven't had a meeting since March 11, and get everybody kind of refocused on where we are and what we've got to do so that we can get this comprehensive plan finished, or that we feel finished enough to get it to public hearing. And Mr. Curry has suggested perhaps we're going to have a joint public hearing with the Board of Supervisors, which I think would be an excellent idea. But the things that remain to be done, as I have reviewed what we've been doing, are as follows. And then I'm going to go around and see if anybody else has anything else that they think should be on that list. We have to finish some revisions to Chapter 7, which is the future land use plan. And we've done a lot of work on the renewable energy section and the telecom or cell tower issues. So those are pretty well finished. I have some notes from our March meeting that I have some minor editorial changes that we discussed that I'm going to input. I'm going to give that to Mr. Curry. And we're pretty much finished with Chapter 7, except for the maps of the villages, which is where we left off. And hopefully we're going to pick up and talk about that some tonight. In reviewing Chapter 7, in the beginning, which was written before we undertook to put in the maps that we're going to talk about, or have been talking about, and are going to talk about tonight, it basically says there aren't any maps, so there's some revisions editorial that need to be made in the first couple of paragraphs of Chapter 7, which I'll undertake to do once we get the maps pretty well complete. Chapter 8 is what's on the table for tonight, as well as the maps. So that's pretty much discussing the language. And then I want everybody on the commission to basically sit down. I'm going to give Mr. Curry all the changes. We've got these additional maps that we got from the planning district, thanks to Michelle. And so I want to put together a new updated draft with all the changes that we've done since January, all the maps, and I want everybody to sit down one more time and read through. And then we're going to have one more meeting. We're going to have one more work session, and then we're going to have a meeting that's going to be the whole thing under review. And hopefully that's going to lead to, after whatever changes anybody wants to make or discuss making, we're going to vote to take it to public hearing. And in the meantime, we'll discuss with the Board of Supervisors whether they want to do that as a joint public hearing or not. And that's what I'd like to do. And I'd like to, assuming we can get back to work on a more or less regular basis, I would like to see that public hearing happen in July, if we can do it. So, does anybody else have any other topics or agenda items or whatever that they think that I haven't covered, that they think we need to be doing before we take it to public hearing?
Mr. Chair, just if I may, it's very difficult for you to reach out to anybody else. And Chair Smith has found that if you just do a quick round robin and call each person, that's the simplest way to determine if people have input.
Okay. Well, let's go from the bottom up. Mr. Schulin.
Not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Henry?
I'm in favor of getting the comp plan as done as soon as possible. I think, I think we're getting to a point now on some of the revisions that we're, just wordsmithing too much detail, and I think it's a very acceptable document. So I think we need to approve it and move on.
Okay. Mr. Kohler?
Straight ahead.
Miss Ishii?
Just a sort of procedural question, I guess. So as we discuss these maps, and recognizing that some folks who are on the phone and otherwise can't view what we're discussing, is there any FOIA or other concern raised by that? I asked this to David Connick, I guess, and Gary Curry, or anybody else who might know. I don't know.
Well, my answer to the question is, I guess, in two parts. One is what we're going to discuss tonight is just a discussion, and the maps they're on board docs, and so people can hear what we're discussing and they can look at the maps if we get to that part on their computers. And this whole procedure is an exception to the Freedom of Information Act. So we're sort of out on in some somewhat uncharted territory. But I mean, I think technically we're in compliance. On the other hand, just from a public policy sort of point of view, I don't think we're going to finish the maps tonight, because I think it's going to be very difficult to do that over the phone or over the Zoom or whatever in an electronic meeting. So I think there's going to be one more bite at that apple, and hopefully that's going to be in a physical meeting or a regular meeting. So that's my answer. Do you have anything different to say, Mr. Curry?
I would just say that FOIA requires you to provide agenda materials to the public the same time it's made available to the body. That was done via board docs. Those members, the citizens have had time over the last several days to access these documents in the same manner that they're always available for meetings. And they could have downloaded them and have them in front of them right now, whether they're connected via Zoom with their computer or through their telephone. You can be looking at the maps as you discuss them. And then lastly, you will ultimately have a public hearing to consider a candidate comprehensive plan. The maps are part of that. And only at that point in time will you be considering ultimately what the maps will include in the document that you recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
Right. And depending on whether or not we have a joint public hearing, there may be a second public hearing before the Board of Supervisors at which they'll have another bite at the maps. If I could mix the metaphors there. Anyway, so does that answer your question, Mary
Yes,
Catherine?
thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. I think we're up to you, Mr. Light.
What you outlined works for me.
Okay, thank you. I didn't leave anybody out, did I?
Yeah, me,
Good.
and I was feeling bad about it too.
Oh, yeah, right. Ron Fraser. I thought I left somebody out. Go
You
ahead,
did that
Ron.
on purpose. I'm with you guys.
I was afraid you were going to ask me to repeat what I said.
I only used that once or twice, and I was saving the second time.
Mm-hmm. Well, for those of you who don't know what the basis of that business is, Ron asked me to do that about 1980 at some meeting when I was the parliamentarian. Went into one of my long-winded explanations of some procedural matter. And so, all right, go ahead, Mr. Fraser. What do you have to say about what I just said about what we're going to do from here on?
No, I think it's the plan, and I'm glad that we're getting back to work. I'm not
Okay.
sure about getting to the maps tonight, but if we can just get some of this language knocked out, I think we've pretty much got that taken care of. We just have to finalize it. I think we can do it tonight.
Okay. All right. Well,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah, who is that?
Al Henry, just one question.
Oh.
I'm looking at board docs. Where are the maps that we were talking about located here?
That's a good question. I'm looking for it myself. So you're on the phone, I saw, right?
Yeah.
You go under old business under review of draft comprehensive plan.
Wait, I'm doing it too because I had them up. I had it and then I lost it. Well, what's the feeling of the board? Do you want to try and do these maps, or you just want to defer that? I mean, I'll just say this before we get to this decision, and that is, I have an understanding. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I think that phase 2 of the governor's program to go get back to normal, or whatever it's called, is going to go into effect sometime next week or the following week. So conceivably in the first week of June, we can have a regular meeting and we can have a work session and do that. And I just kind of think that might be a better idea for the map business. But
These are the same maps that we looked at a couple months ago?
yes.
Okay, nothing's been done to them?
No, because we didn't really, we had a discussion, and as I recollect, it got to be 6 o'clock, and so we adjourned the meeting, and that was the end.
Okay, cool.
Well,
So there haven't been any changes made to the map, and one thing that and I don't know if he has joined the meeting or not because I can't see it. So, Mr. Curry, maybe you can tell me. Oh, I'm viewing Gary Curry's screen. Great. Well, now I've got this back. I don't know what I did, but I did it. I asked Alex Sharp to join us if he could. And has he joined the meeting? Do you know, Mr. Curry? I think he was going to call in.
There's a phone number that just raised their hand, so I'll unmute that line. Is that you, Alex? Alex, are you on the phone line?
Yeah.
Oh, there, good. All right. Can everybody hear Alex?
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Well, I asked Alex to join us just a little bit because one of the issues that came up when we were discussing the Sperryville map for the future land use plan section was the Water and Sewer Authority and what was the capacity of the system and how much growth it could accommodate, and about distances and what did it matter if it was far or near, and nobody really had the answers to the questions. So I invited Alex to join us, and thank you, Alex, for doing that. So we had to talk about it. I'm just going to ask you, Alex, to sort of go over what is the current capacity of the system. If there was to be growth, how much growth could it accommodate? And what are the other parameters of it or issues related to it, like the distance from the treatment plant or anything like that? So I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to answer those three questions, if you could.
Okay, so basically the system right now, we have about 180 couple accounts, those are separate connections. Some of them have multi-family uses, and some of them are commercial. there are a total of, out of those 182 or 3 connections, there's almost 300 EDUs assigned, which are equivalent dwelling units, which is the basis on which we bill. The plant is running at approximately half of its permitted discharge level on average. It cannot run the 100% on a regular basis. If it does exceed the 100% for so many months in a row, then you have to modify the plant or reduce the inflow in order to keep within the permit level. So there is significant room for new connections or new dwelling units. But I would say out of the 183 accounts, we probably could, I would guess, do another 100 to 120, which would be the equivalent of that many dwellings or dwelling units, which is the equivalent of a family, dwelling unit. On average, the commercial uses, which those are most of the multiple EDU accounts, don't use nearly as much gallonage as a residence, or at least that's what we think. So adding commercial uses probably would not put as much strain on the plant as, or not strain, but increase inflow as it would not probably do as much unless it's a really water intensive use compared to dwellings. And our permit is renewed every 5 years. And so basically we're kind of grandfathered in on some of the discharge, the levels that we're allowed to discharge. If we were to do a significant expansion, then we might have to meet new regulations that we don't have to meet now. And the examples might be on nitrates and nutrients and so forth. So there would be more expense in increasing the capacity than just adding tanks or, gallons of capacity at the plant. We charge $7,500 per EDU for dwelling, for like residential uses, and $3,750 per EDU for additional commercial uses, EDUs. And let's see, what's the other question? So basically, some of the expense of expansion could be paid by the connection fees that the new uses would generate. And then the question about piping, I don't necessarily think that piping would be a constraint. The further away from the plant you get, like into the edges, outer reaches of the service area, the piping is smaller. And then it gets larger as as more houses or dwellings or connections feed into it. And so the system is actually septic. It's called a step system, but it's basically a septic tanks at each location, which collect the solids. And then it's just wastewater that goes to the plant, and it's in a moderately pressurized or can be pressurized line, which goes from the pump chamber, which is right next to the individual septic tank, into the pressurized system, and then it goes to the plant. So it's likely that there could be significant additions without needing larger piping. I guess one final thought is there has been from the beginning this issue of infiltration of groundwater, which occurs during rain events. And so when the water table rises, it causes water to enter the system. We think most likely in the before the pressurized part. And that could be at breaks in the lines, old collection pipes coming from the dwelling to the septic tank. It can leak at the septic tank, into the septic tank. And anyway, so those are probably the most likely sources of the infiltration. That's a very difficult thing to eliminate, but it is something that if it could be reduced, that would probably increase the capacity. And our most recent capital expense was to install a digital inflow meter, which reads the flow into the plant very accurately. So we're studying that to, get a handle on what the flow is and what the maximum flow per half-hour period and so forth. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. I really appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure at least a lot of that is helpful to me. So basically what you're saying is that you could add about 50 or 75% onto, in other words, about 100 dwellings without any undue necessity to add on to the existing facility?
Yeah, I think that's likely, yes.
Okay.
Maybe
right,
even a little bit more.
All right, let's go around and see if anybody else has any questions. Mr. Frazier?
Yes, I raised my hand. Thank you, sir. I have a question for Mr. Sharp. And I was going to ask about flow meters, and you mentioned that you have inflow meters. So is that point of source, or is that just at a collection area? So
You're
what I'm
talking
saying is,
about
with each EDU?
No.
You're right.
No, the flow. No. Okay, so most sewer plants, most situations, a water and sewer is provided. And so the metering there usually is the water that is metered.
Right.
And then the sewers. Right. And so in this case, there is no, we're not providing water. So we are not reading. And there's a few cases of people where they're metering their water and taking readings, but our billing is based on a somewhat arbitrary, estimate of equivalent dwelling units. So, and the inflow meter I'm describing is actually right before the plant. So it's after everything has been collected.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions, Ron?
That pretty much summed up what I had. So we don't have any idea, but we think that residential uses would use less, or would be discharging more wastewater than. Right, they would be discharging more because they use more water. So, a restaurant probably uses a lot of water. But what we're looking at, we have a pending application for a text amendment, I believe you're aware of, to allow certain uses in highway commercial that are currently being, I think, used in violation of our highway commercial zoning. So we're trying to figure out. I'm against doing something piecemeal. I think we really need to look at what's going to go on there in highway commercial, what we're proposing to do, so that it doesn't come back to get us later.
Right.
So that's kind of what I appreciate you, being on here tonight.
All right. Mary Catherine, I think that means your hand is up, right?
It is. Thank you very much. So thanks, Al Sharp, for being here. It's very helpful to hear your information. It would have been great, actually, to know that you were going to be here tonight, because I know there are members of the Sperryville community who probably would be really interested to hear this. But I guess my first question is, it's back to the maps. The Sperryville map that I'm looking at, which is a little different maybe from some of the past ones, but what I understand is on the Sperryville map we have right now is village residential and village commercial as currently zoned. So I guess I'm back to the question of what are these maps for? I thought we left off the discussion at some point that, and certainly this is something that I'm comfortable with, that the maps would show current zoning that, well, let me step back. The comprehensive plan already stipulates that the villages are undefined areas and they don't have boundaries. They're just from time immemorial places where people gathered. And I recognize that we do say in the comprehensive plan that those would be the places for additional development if it were to occur. But there's nothing to indicate that we would change any zoning in order to do that. So my understanding of the maps was that they were going to show what the current zoning was around the existing villages for, in Sperryville's case at least, village residential and village commercial. So I'm not positive what the merits of this, I'm not sure what we're trying to get at. I don't mean to question the merits. I just wonder what we're trying to accomplish by discussing the extent of the septic system, or what, are we just talking about what our current zoning, which is what I think these maps are showing, could handle? Because if we're talking about somehow expansion, that's just an enormous issue, and that would raise a lot of questions for me. So that's, I guess, my first.
Okay. Well, do you want me to answer that, or? I mean, my answer to it is what's going in this chapter is entitled Future Land Use Plan. So part of determining what the future land use plan should be has to take into account the availability of water and sewer. And there has been some discussion, and that's where we left off. I don't know that we have resolved this as a commission. The parameters of the answer to your question are, we could say the future land use plan is no growth at all. We're going to stay with the same zoning, and we're not going to rezone anything around any villages or anywhere else. So in that context, yeah, I guess what the capacity of the sewer system is would be irrelevant. But or the future land use plan, which I think is what's in there, because it talks about directing growth. So it talks about some kind of growth. It doesn't say how much growth, but it talks about directing whatever growth there's going to be to the village, the existing villages. And so I'm talking about residential primarily, but also some of the business uses are not supposed to be scattered all over the county. They're supposed to also be in similar to what Fauquier has. They've got what they call service districts, most of which have their own water and sewer. And that's where they want to direct their growth, multifamily housing and commercial type growth. So we haven't struck that balance, and we haven't said anything. I have to say that if you say there's going to be no growth, I don't know whether that's going to pass muster, and I think you might have some issues there later on, some legal issues, which maybe Mr. Curry wants to talk about. But the reason that I invited Alex to comment is just so that everybody's aware of. We could say, depending on, I'm not saying we should say, I'm saying we could say that certain areas on that map that you're all looking at could get hash marks or something, some designation on them of the areas where, if there's going to be growth, that's where it should be focused. Not that there will be, but that if there's going to be rezoning and if there's going to be growth, that's where it's going to be.
Mr. Chairman.
And I think if we don't make some provision for it somewhere, I think we're on pretty thin ice, frankly. Because, I mean, technically, when somebody comes in with a rezoning application, the first question that we as a commission and the Board of Supervisors, as the approving authority, should be asking is, what does it say in the comp plan? Is this the area that's designated to be rezoned for that type of use? And if the answer is no, then your rezoning is going to be denied. And that's why I say if you don't have any place for any kind of growth, I think you're on thin ice. But anyway, that's enough out of me.
Mr. Chairman?
Does anybody else have any questions for Alex before we get to all those exciting issues?
I do.
Rick?
Yes. Alex, this is not necessarily your domain, but since we're talking about water and sewer, does anybody know how much water table we have there to draw on in Sperryville? I know there's a lot of very deep wells there. Are you familiar?
If you're asking me, all I know, they did a study when they did the Miller's golf course, because that was a big issue.
Right.
And I think that Al Henry, I bet he remembers, but I think it was Vincent Day, maybe Ron remembers. I think Vincent Day did some kind of hydrological study. Huh?
I believe that's correct.
So I know it's in the minutes, and I know the study is part of our records, and that was, what, 10, 12 years ago?
Probably.
So I know there's that, and then there's that other water study that's referenced in the comp plan, but I think that's sort of a general county-wide type of thing. But the one is pretty specific to the one property, and the other is not very specific at all.
Well, if I may, from what I'm hearing, right now we have certain areas that are shown in this purple, if you're looking at the map, that are zoned either village residential or village commercial. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that is and there is vacant land in a lot of that area.
Right.
So those are the area, and since villages do not have defined boundaries, we're looking at really a map of the current zoning is all we're looking at.
Right.
For those two categories. And I think that, at some point we probably do need to look at where things are going to grow, but I'd hate to try to jump on that and try to change that too much, or to make that presumption without a pretty good study in advance.
Could I interject something when I get a chance?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so there is a service area designated for the sewer system, and there is a map, or we have a map, and I don't know if you have reference to that, but there is a designated service area. So that might be relevant to some of this.
Mr. Chairman?
I've never seen it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Alvin Henry. I think if you talk to the people of Sperryville, their perception of Sperryville is that Sperryville is greater than the village commercial and the village residential areas. I think their perception will probably be compatible with what the sewer service map lays out. And I think probably if you went back and look at the minutes of when the Sperryville Sewer Authority was established back in the 80s, Sperryville was envisioned and outlined at that time, went up to basically the park. And, there might be some small vacant areas in the village residential and the village commercial areas. I think if you went to try to find a village commercial lot that's vacant, greater than an acre, you'd be hard pressed to do it. And it's the same way if you wanted to find a buildable residential lots in the village. I think you would be very challenging to find it. There may be some vacant parcels, but when you look at the highway commercial area going up to 11, with sewer all along the road, you got an area up there, and we had talked about it over the years in previous planning commissions going back 20 years, where this area up through there was kind of economically disadvantaged area. It had became blighted with abandoned tourist structures, whether fruit stands and the old TP, I think it was called the old Tasty Freeze dairy diner up there, where that got eventually tore down. Where
really dating yourself now, Al.
Yeah, well, all these things up through there. The place on the right that has was a vape store in one of the little cabins. I mean, the whole area up through there, with the decline in traffic to the park in the 70s and 80s, became a blighted area. And with sewer up through there, it's really the only place in Rappahannock County that is going to see growth, and it will see growth. You're already seeing it. We're closing our eyes and looking the other way for whatever political or personal reason that we have. Look what's happened up there. You got the old parkway that got renovated and turned into a restaurant. You got the property across the road that was a fruit stand that now is off the grid, the restaurant. You move on down, you got Van Flange's showroom. You got his building across the street where he makes the furniture. You come down, you got the building, the cedar-sided building there next to the old ball diamond that was built. You got Von Flange's older glass-blowing thing across the street. You have auto repair, you have a barber shop, you have an insurance office, and there's plenty of lots still available down through there. This is where the growth is going to happen. If you want to build a dentist office, a doctor's office, any type of professional building in the county, you're probably going to have to look here to find something. And whether you want to, do a commercial property, it's probably where it's going to happen. So this is really where the growth is going to happen. It's not going to happen in Amosville. There's nothing in Amosville. And in Amosville, the highway commercial, I guess what exists is easily within the defined village close to downtown there.
I don't think there is any highway commercial in Amosville.
And there's no defined village.
Well, what's Hackley's? Whatever Hackley's is.
Hackley's, I think, is village commercial.
Well, village commercial, yeah. But so if Sperryville has only highway commercial, that's where it's gonna, the growth in the county is gonna happen. And I think we're putting our heads in the sand if we think it's not, and we should be looking to it. And we have heard the public talk in the last year or two how the county needs more commercial activity, more businesses, more tax revenue, and this is where it's going to come from. And we've seen that, some of the efforts for ag tourism and things like this, and lodging gives a few pennies, on the budget. But, this is where it's going to happen. If somebody wants to put in a doctor's clinic, they're going to want sewer, and that's where it should be. So if somebody wanted to do a small nursing home, maybe that is where it should be. And you heard Alex speak that there's lots of capacity now. So, it's where it's going to happen, and we need some of that. So I don't think we should close our eyes to it, but embrace it as we've always embraced. Sperryville is greater than just the village commercial and the village residential.
Okay. I mean, I tend to agree with you, but
that's the reality.
This map doesn't really show that.
Well, we had that argument a couple months ago. The board, a couple people.
Well, we didn't have an argument. We just had a discussion. But okay, so what's the remedy? What should the map be on the map?
The map should basically include the sewer area. It should include the highway commercial. That's the village of Sperryville. You go up and ask any of their businesses up to there, are they part of Sperryville? And they're going to tell you yes.
Mm-hmm.
David, at what point is it appropriate to jump in? Are we going to go all the way through, or how are we going to do this?
I don't know. Does anybody else want to speak before Mary Catherine gets another bite at the apple? Okay, go ahead, Mary Catherine. What?
This is Gary. I just wanted to make one distinction. I believe to your original summary, David, before the thought is lost.
Okay.
And that is, if I heard you correctly, you kind of painted the picture as either no growth or changed zoning to facilitate growth. And I just like to offer that I think there is a middle ground there, which is we're not saying no growth. We're saying that the current zoning supports our vision for growth in activities.
Right. No, I was trying to paint the two end zones and say wherever it's going to be is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, that's all.
So thank you for that, for clarifying that, because that's exactly what I meant. I mean, the question is what's on the map adequate, subject to Al's proposal that we basically add the highway commercial back in. And I have something I want to suggest about that. Is what we've got here adequate to do what you just suggested, Gary? Like for example, I'm looking at the map, and I mean, the thing that sort of jumps out at me is this area that's under where it says post office. You know, why isn't that part? Why isn't that someplace that, you know, if there was going to be growth, why wouldn't that be part of it?
Well, I think it is.
My only comment about this is this topic that we are on strikes me as something that is significant. I want to say departure, but it's a significant step that to me is head and shoulders above all the others with respect to presenting challenges to get this completed in the time frame that you outlined in the beginning. But having said that, you know, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. I'm just wondering if it's really something feasible in the time frame that we're trying to give to it, because
you could take a crayon out right now and put the line on there and we'll be done.
Yeah.
I just want everybody to think about it. I mean, I think that at some point that's, you know, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is if we're all looking at the map, should there be some kind of a line that goes from, who's got that pointer? Drop it down about an inch. Yeah, right there, from that corner over to right through the, like they're mind readers. And right on up, and then connect up this part and go over to, go up to where that creek is. There you go. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Now make a hard left and go over to that other point on the other side of volunteer rescue, way over there. Yeah. And then come back and pick up and make, in other words, make an integrated whole section there, kind of, and maybe run it further up as Al suggested, and just say that's it, and say that the current zoning should be permissible, should permit whatever growth we foresee in the next 5 or 10 years. But anything out, what I want to say is I'm not worried about what's included in the circle. I think it ought to say that anything that's outside the line shouldn't be considered for rezoning. In other words, until all that area is filled up, there's not going to be any rezonings out for residential or what?
No. If it's got sewer, it should be part of a future growth area.
That's what I'm saying, but we don't have that map yet, so we're going to have to get that.
Well,
If you're up at Parkway, you should be treated no differently there than you would be down at the down there at the intersection of Main Street area. You shouldn't be treated any differently. There's no differential in those two areas. You have sewer, you have access. The sewer is what gives this property, this whole corridor there, growth potential, and we should recognize it now as we have recognized it for the last 30 years.
All right, no, I tend to agree with that.
So
Well, I don't agree with it. So,
okay, well, wait a minute. I want to
Here's
ask
Adam
Alex.
James talking
Is Alex Sharp still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Alex, how I've never seen the map that you're talking about, but does it make a difference? Like, as I understand it, the main pipeline goes right up to 11, right?
Yes, I mean okay, the top towards the park, I believe Country Manor, or what is now the Hearthstone School, may be the end of the line. I think that may be the farthest.
Okay, but now my question is, how far away from 211 can you go and still hook up? Do you have to have frontage on 211, or can it go back?
No. Okay, so you can go up. There's where, like, for example, Antiques Lane, like, goes up past where Elmer Atkins's place used to be.
Yeah.
Right.
There's Atkins Lane. I don't know. So it does come off of 211 in these laterals that go up and maybe serve, 10 or 12 or more houses on each road, maybe more than that. I'd have to look at the map. But yes, it's not right along 211. It also radiates off of 211 in these spurs. And so the line going down 211, like, it's on one side, and then, there's some possibly tunneling under 211 to connect properties on the other side of the road, depending on where it is. But that's not too bad. I mean, that's the only way you can cross 211 is basically directly across it. But so we have lines along 211 all the way down. All the way down basically to the schoolhouse, I think.
And what about out on 211 there, like next to the golf course? Does it go there?
Okay, so that property, and then there's the Water Street, which goes, along the river, and then goes on out past the river district area where the brewery is, and then it goes out that road to basically across from Waterpenny.
Right.
It does,
this is MK. Do you know where the Washington sewer goes? Do you know the boundaries of the sewer in the town of Washington?
Do I?
Right.
Well, I don't think it goes out Piedmont Avenue very far, but I think otherwise it takes in the town, basically.
And areas where they're looking at, for example, down where the post office is and around there, it expands out that way?
Well, the sewer plant is right there. Yeah, so, yeah.
So I appreciate all this, and it's a very interesting discussion. But again, a lot of points are raised here, but I will just say off the get-go that this is not a small topic. This is a huge topic. If you are talking about creating a map that shows whole new areas, that some people are inside those, whatever boundaries you draw, whether it's in Sperryville or Little Washington or Amosville or anywhere, and some people are on the other side of that line, and tax consequences may happen to them, Okay, Ron, I know you don't like it, but.
It's not Ron, it's Melvalina.
I think he agrees with it.
So, you know, this is not
Christine,
this is not a little topic. And I will, I understand that many people may feel Sperryville goes farther. I live in Sperryville and I consider Sperryville Main Street. So the zip code for Sperryville or the zip code for Amosville or the zip code for Flint Hill goes all kinds of places. So you can make all kinds of arguments for where you ought to draw lines or where you ought not to draw lines. But again, is the purpose of these maps to encourage new construction and encourage zoning changes? Or are we looking at the fact, as has already been brought up, which is where I think we should be looking, that there is plenty of space to increase building if one wants to do it within the current zoning? There are
That is a false statement right there. Mary Catherine?
It is not a false statement, Al, with all due respect.
You cannot show me 5 properties that are for sale available for commercial or residential development lots in that area of Sperryville. I don't think you
They
can show
may
me.
not be for sale, Al, but they are available. And if you want to talk after the meeting, and I can take you around and show you them if you'd like.
Well, listen, this is what I'm saying is the way it's been, and it makes sense. And if you go and look at zoning in other towns, other counties, if you look at study zoning, if you got sewer in place, that area in a county where, over how many thousand miles we have square miles in this county, the area that we have sewer in is probably less on a quarter up there, probably is 20 acres, okay? And if that, any zoning class, any zoning professor, any professional will tell you if you got the volume of land we do, and this is the only place that we have sewer in the county that has capacity, this is where any development should occur. It's common sense.
Well, Al, that presumes that somebody wants that new development to occur. So that discussion would have to be brought up in the first place.
Hey, we'll have that discussion. You're putting your opinion over the whole village of Sperryville.
I am not doing that. I am saying that we asked.
Well,
I have not heard your comment.
All right, wait a minute now. Let's go one at a time.
So I'm not going to let you push over all the landowners on Sperryville and 211 just to give you what your vision of Sperryville should be for the next generation. It's not right.
My vision of Sperryville is not what's at issue here.
Yes,
what's at issue here is, beg your pardon, excuse me.
All right, come on, wait a minute. I'll let her finish. And then I'll give you a shot. Go ahead, Mary Catherine.
Stop. I'm talking, Dave. Either we're going to include 211 in that map, or we're not going to do any map.
Well, don't do a map then. I don't care. But I'm telling you, Al, I expect a little respect on
over
this.
All those other people that worked hard to have businesses for generations up through that area. You're not going to do it without them agreeing with you. And I think if there's a public hearing and we talk about this in a public forum in Sperryville, I think you're going to find out you're wrong.
Well, Al, that will be just fine if that happens. But in the meanwhile, you are suggesting, if I'm understanding you properly, that what you want to do is encourage new construction over the entire corridor heading to the Shenandoah National Park and other areas of Sperryville.
I want to protect the property rights of all those people up along that corridor. All these people gave up easements 30 years ago for this sewer, and they've hooked onto it. Some of them have, some of them haven't. There was mixed reviews when they first did it. But any growth that's going to happen in this county that requires sewer disposal is going to happen in there. So as a planning commission, we need to recognize that is where the growth is going to happen, and we should accordingly plan on it.
Well,
I'd
you know what?
like to say something.
Right, go ahead.
If
Please
I
go
may,
ahead.
I'd like to say.
Wait, who is it?
This is Rick.
Oh, Rick, all right, go ahead. Rick's got the floor.
As you can see, there's different sides of this whole thing. Gary Light, a few minutes ago, said that this topic is much bigger than almost everything else in the comprehensive plan that we've done so far.
Well, then we shouldn't do the comprehensive plan until we address it. If this is so big, then it would be an incomplete plan if we didn't address it.
Well, I mean,
all right, let Rick finish, Al.
Yeah, allow me, please. But and I'm not trying to make this a battle. I'm just saying that this is going to be controversial, and I don't think that it's going to go. The comprehensive plan is going to be. We're going to be able to close it up and move on to other things. If we start changing boundaries of town, villages, and creating new zoning lines, just right off the top, and I just think that's going to really bog this whole plan down, and we're going to be sorry we tried. I think.
All right, wait a minute. Stop.
Excuse me.
Stop.
I think it's
Wait.
something that.
Both of you, stop. Let's hear from somebody else who we haven't heard from.
Well,
like Brian Shulin. What do you have to say?
Well, I understand MK's position, but I also kind of agree with Al. It's just hard to envision that area not including 211.
Could I make an observation and then I'm going to need to go? Just it may be helpful.
Okay, I hope it will be.
Okay, so basically the sewer was put in originally to offset, I think, that there were a lot of drain fields in a floodplain.
Right.
And they were not satisfactory and they were failing and causing problems. But there has been a lot of development along the river. I mean, if you're talking about houses, businesses, I think like what Al says, Sperryville goes much farther away from 211 than you might think. And I think it's probably more like 100 or more acres in Sperryville if you really look at what's included, because you're going up the hill across, if you're going west on Sperryville to your right, there's a fair amount of area, and there's potential up there for nice land that is not in floodplain that could be developed, that is right at the village. So I think there is potential, but I do think the sewer was put in recognizing the growth that was already there 35 years ago. And so it's more of a recognition of what has been there. I don't know that it's charting any new territory, but I do agree with Al to the extent that 211 from just below Country Manor or the school all the way down to the Shaw's Services and Main Street and to the right as you go towards the park. It's all Sperryville, in my opinion, and even Woodard Lane to some extent.
Well, I appreciate
that would just be
Al, as long as you're on, can I ask you a couple of quick questions? So when you talk about, when we're talking about building to fit the capacity for the septic system, does that take into account for the increased rainfall that we're experiencing these days and sewer overflow? What am I trying to say? The storm
infiltration.
Pardon me?
Infiltration.
Yeah, increases in stormwater management. So
right.
will that be likely, what kind of cost would that be likely to add to the taxpayers if we have increased stormwater management cost, if we have to replace any of those old pipes because of increased infiltration? Those pipes, that system is 30 years old. My system in Sperryville is 30 years old at least. And those pipes are older.
Well, let me observe
this. What point are those going to need to be replaced?
Let me observe this. When we dig up those collection systems, they are buried. They are in a gravel, bed, and when we get down to them, the pipe is brand new. Still, it's PVC pipe. It is not steel pipe, and it's protected.
Then why is it leaking?
It is not leaking.
Infiltration problems.
It is not leaking.
Why are you having infiltration problems?
It's in the no pressure side. It's in between the houses and the septic tanks and at the septic tanks. That's in all the gravity side. Part of it is because they connected into very old lines. They did not put new lines in every case.
So are you
from the house.
There won't be any additional, you're not assuming any additional cost for replacing any of those lines in the next 20 years?
No, they don't belong. Those lines don't belong to you, do they, Alex?
No, well, from the house to technically, yes. And they could be replaced, yes, but some of these are like from the 1920s.
Alex,
And a lot of them are terracotta pipe.
Alex,
Yes.
if there was new construction, then all the lines coming from any new structure to the to your sewer line would be modern material, and there would be no infiltration, correct?
I mean, you would think not, yes.
Right.
Yes.
But even if there's no infiltration, if there's a major stormwater event, doesn't that add to the strains on the
Catherine,
system?
that's no different what you got today. So if you had any new development, it wouldn't affect it. You got any existing water filtration is either it has.
Al, that's not true. If you have a major stormwater event, I'm asking Al Sharp, if you have a major stormwater event, does that add to the strains on the system?
Okay, we are not handling surface water, okay? We are the water that is coming in is groundwater. When the water table in Sperryville is just comes up to a couple of feet below the surface.
Right.
When it rains. So that applies pressure to these tanks that are buried. And a lot of these tanks do not have good seals around where they're joined together. And so that's where a lot of this infiltration is coming. The other part is these lines coming from the house that were just going straight to the river. They intercepted them, but they're in some cases terracotta, and they're have lots of interruptions in them where groundwater comes in. That's where that's coming from.
Mary Catherine, you might as well let's move on. We can talk these technicalities with Alex. Is not the place to do all this tonight.
It may not be, Al, but the problem is when you bring up this kind of topic, these are exactly the kinds of questions we need to dig into if we're going to start drawing lines on maps. These are exactly the kinds of things in other jurisdictions that add huge cost to taxpayers. And I think the taxpayers of Rappahannock
come
County
on, one at a time. Let her finish, Al, and then you can have a shot.
Thank you, David. I think the taxpayers of Rappahannock County and Sperryville are entitled to understand before we start drawing lines on maps. Hey, David, can we have
All right, wait a minute, Al. I'll let you have your chance.
Catherine, you're blowing smoke again.
David, can we have an agreement here about who can talk?
You and I did, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's worth
Come
having a
on,
meeting.
Al, let her finish and don't interrupt. And then I'll let you answer. Go ahead, Mary Catherine.
Oh,
Thank
God, here we go.
Thank you. I think that I, as a taxpayer in Sperryville, and us as taxpayers in Rappahannock County, before we start drawing lines on maps, need to understand what the potential costs are going to be if there are build-outs according to those lines. That can include things like just drawing a line because the sewer system may service that, may or may not well service that area, does not analyze the whole cost factor, including the other cost of development. So just, it is way premature to start drawing lines just around a septic field. And
okay.
I think that's where we were going with these maps.
Well, I would like to say something, and then I'm going to let Al reply. What I think is, that's what the Planning Commission exists for, to draw lines on maps and say, here's the area where you can do whatever it is, and here's the area that you can't do what you want to do. Here's the area we want to preserve, and here's the area where we want to promote any growth, if there is going to be any, into this area so that we don't louse up the other area that we're trying to preserve. And that is the main goal of all this zoning and planning. So to wait a minute. So to say that we don't want to be drawing any lines on any maps is the antithesis of good zoning practices. That's number one. Number two, that's the main deficiency of the existing comprehensive plan. And I appreciate what others, especially Gary Light, has said, and others. We got to get it across the finish line. But if we don't have something to go by, that's what this is supposed to be, the general conceptual plan of the future of the county. And so we have to draw lines on some map sometime, and that's why we're having this discussion.
Well, that's
and third of all, I I mean, I agree 100% with what Al said previously, that any professor of planning or zoning or anything else is going to tell you the growth should be directed to the area that's served by water and sewer and other facilities and the fire protection and so forth and so on, where they can deal with it, not somewhere else. And so Sperryville obviously is the focus of this whole discussion tonight. And the map is already the second time, and now I'm starting to remember what we talked about back in March, because it's the only place outside of the town of Washington that we have a sewer system. So,
well, also most jurisdictions, when they draw lines, usually have studies done to understand what some of the consequences, tax and otherwise, and environmental or whatever they may be, are. And just drawing lines because you have a sewer system there does not take into account increased potential for traffic. It doesn't take into account increase, as Al Sharp said, we're grandfathered in on some of these levels that we have, but if we have to meet new regulations, that could be another exponential.
Well, that's if they have to expand it. If they don't have to expand, I mean, mainly I wanted you to hear what is the capacity of the existing grandfathered facility.
He said
it's approximately 100 dwelling units.
I don't know if he's still on, but what I understood him to say, unless I misheard it, was that we're grandfathered in on some of our levels now, but we might have to meet new regulations.
Only if they have to expand the system.
Well, I would want clarification on that, but okay, I'll take
No, I can tell you, we have a permit now. We have a permit now for the plant for 55,000 gallons per day. We're using about half of that. If we go to get above the 55,000 on a regular basis, then we will need to get a new permit level, which that would be the incident that would trigger potential new requirements.
So the 55,000 gallons, does that mean that, so is what David was just saying, is that the answer, that we could put on 100 new houses and still not have to get any new permits?
That's what I'm estimating. Yes, it probably is a little more than that.
Okay.
Plenty of capacity to consider additional growth in that area. Plenty of capacity. That's what's being said.
And so how many lots do we have that could be developed in the current zoning that might bring?
Well, that's one of the things that I was just going to say. Exactly right. The next step is to do some kind of a build-out analysis, which is to take all the areas, take that map, and it's not hard to do, because Michelle gave the planning district, whatever they're called, RR, whatever, Rappahannock or Rapidan, the planning district, gave them the zoning maps. So you take the zoning maps and you have all the parcels there, so you got to total them up and see how many acres they are and divide by, if they're village commercial, divide by 1. Because it's 1 acre zoning in village residential.
But David,
and then take out all the ones that are already built, so you know by the Commissioner of Revenue what's built and what isn't. So that's how you do it. What I answer Al's question exactly. You could do with a zoning map, because it's really not a zoning map; it's a tax map. So you take each parcel and you go and you see, does it have improvements, yes or no? And if the answer is no, that's a potential build-out lot. Or that's a lot that could be built on and add a new dwelling unit. And that's how you get a rough estimate on what you've got encompassed in the map and how it could be built out. So
I wonder if we could look at some of the other maps, and we've spent a lot of time on Sperryville. I wonder if we can compare some of the other maps to what we are doing in Sperryville.
Oh, before we do, could I make another comment that I think is
sure? Go ahead, Gary.
The distinctions here. I think part of the challenge that's creating the tension here is another aspect of this that we're not really addressing head on, which is the current zoning with highway commercial being along there already allows a certain level of intensive use along the lines of what Al has been presenting. But what has not been addressed and what is unclear so far in this conversation is what are we saying about the possibilities in those areas that we would draw within this development boundary that are not currently either village commercial or highway commercial zone? Are we, for example, as we're contemplating for this highway commercial text amendment, are we talking about expanded uses, larger scale commercial industrial facilities? I don't think you can adequately address this question and resolve the difference between the points of views even represented by this small set of us without not only showing the geographic allocation of these lines, but what it is we're saying about the intensification of activities within those lines. And I think that's where some of this tension is, and that's another reason that this was going to be very complicated.
Gary, Mike, I am not saying about any intensification. I'm only saying that a map of Sperryville should show the quarter to 11.
Well, you may not mean to be saying intensification, but I think you are implying it whether you intend to or not, because what we're saying here is for the future land use zoning and where is that potentially different than the current zoning, that's what this chapter is about. And if we're sort of saying we're identifying areas that are not that are allowed, that we identify for intensification of zoning, then I think we're kind of bearing that responsibility. And so maybe if you're not saying that any of this needs to be expanded or there's any intensification, then there may not be that much difference between what you're saying and what Mary Catherine is saying. It's just the way you're coming at it.
Well, I think that's a very good point. But what I'm saying something different than and that is the other text of the comp plan in numerous places, in the goals and policies and all that. Everywhere it says, in order to protect agricultural land and the rural character of the county and so forth, all growth should be directed to the villages, the existing villages. And the problem that we've had up till now is no definition of exactly what that means. And compounding that problem, because we didn't have any maps before, we have those horrible, horrible from a planning standpoint, those horrible aerial photographs with no lines. Yeah. So that, as Al pointed out in Amosville, there's huge areas that aren't appropriate for growth, and yet that's all there is. So someone could say, hey, look, I'm in the area that's encompassed in the photograph, so therefore I'm compliant with the comprehensive plan. And what I'm trying to say to everybody is the purpose of the map drawing is not to promote or facilitate expansion or growth. It's to make sure it's clearly defined where you can't have it, not where you, that if we are going to have it, it's got to be somewhere in here, not out in the other part. And that's a big distinction that I don't think that Al is, I think Gary Light is right when he says, I don't think Mary Catherine and they're just looking at it from the opposite points of view, that's all.
Well, I
don't think anybody wants to see, wall-to-wall development in that whole area.
So
and that's not the point. The point is to say, if you're not in that area, don't bother to apply for a rezoning to do a more intensive use.
But we can't only squeeze one side of the balloon and not address the other. And by that I mean, if what we said in this map is, here is a map, or whatever we call it, an aerial image of the Sperryville village area, showing those
Right.
areas that are zoned highway commercial, village commercial, and village residential.
Right?
This is where we expect future growth, and we think that the current zoning supports
Yep.
our vision for whatever
And that
future
will
growth
accommodate
will
the growth
accommodate
that we
future growth.
foresee.
So
But
then we're not inviting zoning changes. We're just acknowledging that this is the place we're talking about, and what we're talking about is growth within this current zoning framework.
Right.
That would be a result of what we're doing here that would, I think, recognize just about everybody's statement so far on this.
so good. Are you going to write that all up and give us the map at the next meeting?
Well, I'm not going to give you the map, but I will try to put words to that effect if we get to that point, which to me is, it's really hard to discuss these maps without also discussing the words that accompany them and give them meaning and context and importance in this place. And I think what's happening is part of the tension is coming from the fact that we're all kind of maybe thinking of them from a different perspective.
Right. Out of context, because the verbiage is not there. All right.
Moving on.
Well, thank you,
So-
everybody. I
Well-
think I'm going to say goodnight.
Thanks,
Okay,
Al.
thank you very
Thank you,
much,
Alex.
Al. You were really helpful. Whoever's idea that was to invite you, it was really a good idea.
Right. Right. So the verbiage would help, and I think you both are right, that may resolve some of the disagreements. But when you talk about, and David, I'm not actually disagreeing with you. I'm following where you're going here, that the current aerial maps we have, I understand your concerns, that they may indicate to somebody, and somebody may be able to make an argument that those grant some kind of rights that aren't otherwise down. But we have to be careful too, I think, we don't have any defined village boundaries now. So if we draw lines that are different from the existing zoning, that may appear to somebody to be establishing some sort of village boundary. And maybe this is exactly where you're going, but I think that raises all kinds of questions to what do we mean by a village boundary? And, does that confer something that we don't intend for it to confer? So it seems to me the easier way, whether we include highway commercial or not, and if that's all that Al's coming, you're coming from, Al Henry, happy to discuss that. I certainly am hearing more than what you're saying, so maybe that's where some of our problem is here. But we can discuss whether highway commercial ought to be part of this or not. But doing anything other than to assert that the village boundaries somehow are going to be defined by these maps that we draw seems to me to be to raise more questions than it answers. So I think we need to be a little careful with that.
Well, I say it only has to answer one question, and that is this an area that would even be considered for rezoning to a more intensive use? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, don't include it. That's all. That's the way I see what the verbiage ought to say. And clarify that this is as specific as we're going to get on all that other policy stuff in Chapter 6 that talks about what a beautiful scenic, all that jazz. It doesn't mean anything if there's no map. Where are you talking about? Where are you talking about preserving? And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about putting some limits on where there could possibly be any kind of growth or development. So, I'm not going to repeat it again.
Mr. Connick, you have a very clear perception of where we should be. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, it wasn't as difficult as I thought. To do this by Zoom. But anyways, it's now 9:15. So, do you want to just let everybody... I think this is a very productive discussion because everyone's thinking about it. And that's good.
I think we
Now-
need to continue this meeting.
Right.
For another day?
I mean, you mean right now or continue it to another time?
No, another time, because we're going to start getting late and we really haven't accomplished anything other than all we've really done is discuss where we need to start.
Well, we're a little bit further ahead than that. All right. Let's talk about, let's skip ahead to the chapter 8 stuff. Or maybe, I mean, or do you want to set a new date and continue this? Now, I'm told, and I don't know, it really isn't confirmed, that we're allowed to start having our regular meetings when phase 2 of the governor's program, or whatever it's called, plan, goes into effect. And I'm understanding that that's either going to be the end of next week or the first week of June.
Let's continue when it opens up.
So, well, that's the trouble with. I'm happy to do that, and it would be my preference as well. The problem is, you know, they've been doing this a little bit like Lucy and Charlie Brown. You know, they keep on saying it's going to be 1 more week or 2 more weeks, and then when that's up, they say, yeah, it's going to be 1 more week or 2 more weeks. So, do you want to try to set? Because we've got to get notices out and all that business. We can continue this meeting. We can recess this meeting and pick a date, and we can recess it to Zoom or a place to be designated if we're allowed to meet. So what do you all think about that? Let's start with you, Mr. Fraser, since you're the one who said we should continue this meeting.
Well, and I say this respectfully, but we can't trust the governor. So I think we need to just go ahead and set another meeting. If it has to be at the Zoom platform, let's continue this discussion and get this work done.
All right, you want to say June the 3rd?
That's fine with me.
Okay, you want to do it in the afternoon or you want to do it at night like this?
Do it at night.
Yeah.
7 o'clock?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. How about you, Rick?
June the 3rd, I'm just looking at the calendar.
It's a Wednesday.
All right. That's probably fine.
Okay. Brian?
That'll work for me.
MK?
Yep. But David,
Gary?
between continuing this and just having another meeting, just
We don't have to go through all the flaming hoops of noticing it again,
I see.
I think.
Yes, you have to notice it if it's continued.
Well, we have to tell them when we're going to continue it, but it's not quite as onerous.
Let's continue it.
What?
Just do the continuation. That's
Right. So, I didn't hear from Gary Light. Are you okay with June 3rd, 7 o'clock?
I am. I would just make one notice, though, with respect to the Chapter 8 stuff. I had sent you an email about this language before our last work session, and I expressed some concerns about some of the additional language. The language is still there, and so are the concerns.
Because to be honest with you, I didn't, you know.
I understand. I just want to make sure that.
So why don't you dig that up and send it to me again, all right?
Well, I mean,
and I'm going to take a look at it
maybe
between now and June 3rd and get the, try and get some, blend in what Mary Catherine did, which I appreciate. And any of the rest of you, if you have comments on what you've got Mary Catherine's comments, you got what I wrote, and then I'll try to circulate it, say, a week before the meeting. Okay? So everybody can have a fresh look at it.
June 3rd is fine with me for that, although.
Okay, and
not a lot
then
of time between a week.
In the meantime, I'm going to I'll get back with Alex and get that map and circulate it, so everybody can see what the sewer map looks like.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
And then we'll maybe blend this all together, and hopefully, I mean, I just think it's a lot easier if we if we're there in person, so some people can walk up and draw on something rather than try and do this, you know, by
Mr.
telling
Curry
someone to move. What?
Mr. Curry and Ms. Summers, does that work for you, that date?
Are you speaking of June 3rd at
Right, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock? It doesn't have to work for me necessarily if you're going to meet.
What do you mean? You're the Wizard of Oz that knows how the thing works. In case we have to do it by Zoom.
Well, you obviously have to notice the meeting at least 3 business days in advance. And if you don't know if phase 2 has started 3 business days in advance, then you will have advertised as a Zoom meeting, obviously. So,
well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to if that doesn't happen, I don't know. I'm inclined, and that's why I brought that up in the beginning. So now we've come full circle. I would like the commission to ask the Board of Supervisors to reconsider what they did, and let us resume at least having basically a work session on the comp plan, to which you see we have, as I saw there, including Alex, we had 15 participants, including the members of the commission and so forth. So, you know, my view is that's reasonable. And that's usually what we get. We get someone from the newspaper, and we get Phil Irwin and 2 or 3 other people.
Well, that's without
plus the commission. So, I mean, we can all maintain some kind of social whatever. We can meet out. We can go out in the parking lot if it's a nice day. But I don't know. But
well, my only comment is I think it's a little different if you start having these special exception reviews.
Well, no. This is a continuation of this meeting, only on the comp plan. So it's essentially going to be a work session.
Yeah. Okay. In that case,
So.
Wait. So what are you saying?
They'll be meeting on the 1st of June. So maybe if you all authorize me to write them a letter and ask that they give us some kind of dispensation from the prior edict, which, again, the governor's edict says government operations or operations of government are exempt, and we're an operation of government. So I don't know why our board, in their wisdom, elected to pass something that's even stricter than what the governor did, but they did. I mean, the planning commissions in all the surrounding areas are hard at work, and they're not limited to just this essential activity, so they're not worried about it. So I'm not sure why we are, but I mean, we've got to do what they tell us to do. So is everybody comfortable with me communicating that to them? I mean, I usually send them a monthly report, so I will put that in there, just a simple statement that we had this meeting, and it's the sentiment of the commission that we should be allowed to have at least work sessions, maybe not public hearings yet, but I don't know, maybe maybe phase 2 will be in effect by then. We don't have to worry about it. So
if phase 2 is in effect by then, I don't have any problems with it. If it's not, I just, as again, somebody who works with senior citizens in the county, I say what I said in the very beginning, that we shouldn't be in the position of asking our over 50 folks who are in special, who consider them in especially vulnerable to whatever's going on in this stuff. We shouldn't ask them to have to choose between protecting their own interests on property and, protecting their own.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not asking them to make that choice, Mary Catherine. First of all, let me ask Mr. Curry something. Wouldn't it be possible, even if we had a physical quorum somewhere at the library or someplace like that, to still have the Zoom thing so people could call in and listen to the meeting, even though we were meeting physically?
It would be technically possible.
Okay. So that's what I propose. And also, if any of you commission members, now that we passed that that policy in the beginning, if you, for any reason, including personal reasons, don't want to come to the meeting physically and be there physically, you can call in or Zoom in or I don't know, whatever. You can participate electronically if you so desire, or if you're concerned about whatever. And so personally, I think that's an acceptable way to do it. And then other people, if they want to, if they still have concerns about coming to the, being there physically present, they can stay home. So somebody make a motion.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to make a motion and a vote, I believe.
All right, how about
I'll
somebody
put that in
make a
the form of a
motion to
motion.
continue the meeting to June 3rd at 7 p.m. at the library, or, can we meet at the courthouse, Mr. Curry, and still do the Zoom thing, or no?
I don't know if the bandwidth is good enough at that location, but again, I'll pull your attention back to the fact that if you're asking the Board of Supervisors on June 1st, if you can meet with a physical quorum on June 3rd, that does not give you 3 business days to properly notice the meeting.
Well, we're going to notice it both ways. Why can't we do that?
I'll have to think about, as your FOIA officer, whether that would be appropriate.
Okay. How much time are you going to need to think about it?
In this
Are
meeting.
you going to do it right now, or you mean?
Hey, let's just do a motion. Let's do a motion to continue the meeting in whatever format that legally is determined to June 3rd by the parties to be. If it's Zoom, fine. If it's in person, fine. We'll
figure that out by the Friday before, right? We'll figure that out by Thursday, May 28th. And if we have to put out some additional notice, we'll do it on the 29th, right?
I second Al's motion.
Mr. Chair, if I might, there literally is no difference in the notification requirements for a continued meeting or a called meeting, which I believe the Planning Commission is entitled to do either. So if you don't know the requirements, why don't you just adjourn this meeting and then call the meeting on the 3rd when you have the definitive information available?
Okay. Everybody okay with that?
So moved.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second to adjourn.
Who
Gary.
moved?
Al
Who moved?
Al moved. Gary seconded.
Which Gary?
Light.
Oh.
The only one on the commission.
Discussion.
Yeah. Any
I hate
further
to discuss
discussion?
whether a motion to adjourn. I really wouldn't want to discuss there, but the problem is, did we come to a final disposition of what we were going to do, asking the board if we could go ahead and start meeting?
No, we didn't. Nobody made a motion to that effect. I mean, I just sort of asked, is everybody okay with me putting that in the monthly report, which I will, like Mr. Curry said, if they don't consider it until the 1st, that's going to mess things up.
Wait, so you're going to put in the report that the commission is asking them to do what?
To allow us to have a physical work session on June 3rd. Limited to the comp plan, not any public hearings or anything like that.
I do not want to be party to complicating the lives of the supervisors who have a lot of other of these things. If the process is such that we can be
I can
on
only
the 3rd,
speak for
fine.
myself. It's not complicating.
Well, that's because you have a particular view. So I don't want to be associated with that sentiment.
I agree.
Okay. All right. So that's 2. So let's go around the table. To just all we're going to do is ask them to allow us to have a work session, not a regular meeting, if we're still in phase 1. So,
Mr. Chair, is this the item that you were contemplating adding to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting but didn't add to the agenda?
Sounds like it.
I would say it's not a
Didn't
germane
get it
item.
then. I don't think we should do it now.
Okay.
Great.
You didn't know what I was saying okay to.
Chairman?
You could amend the agenda now to add it if you want, but I think, you're.
Or we could make a motion to suspend the rules.
Mr. Chairman?
Maybe we should adjourn.
Mr. Chairman?
I think we have a motion and a second to adjourn.
Right.
Mr. Chairman? I
Yeah.
think it's fair to say that you can communicate to our superiors that we're eager to get on with the business of the planning commission.
Right.
In a safe manner, whatever that may be.
Okay. I'll use my discretion, and I'll consult with Mr. Curry about how far that extends. All right, we got a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, sounds like the ayes have it. So thank you all again for participating, and I wish you all well. And I will be in touch about what's going to happen on the 3rd. Okay?
Great.
Good.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Bye now. Good
All
night,
right,
everyone.
thank you very much. Good night.
All right.
All right. Bye, Mr. Irwin.
Thanks, Gary.